Good morning. I have with me Tom Strock. He's one of our environmental service specialists. He works in our forestry area and out at the landfill. What we have before you today is we just want to discuss an easement request up in section 13 of Timothy Township. Tom's going to go through the details of what they're requesting and the location, and then be happy to answer any questions. And we're basically looking for a consensus to, if this is something the board would support, that we would then go back to the property, to the folks who are asking for the easement, and they would then begin the process of getting the earth survey done and all the paperwork done. And then that would come back to a future county board meeting. But Tom, want to turn it over to you and go ahead and explain?
Yes. Good morning, commissioners. So I'll direct your attention to the map over here. So we have a easement proposal in front of us to access the land called Trail Properties, Inc. They own 440s in Section 18 of Timothy Township, and they're looking for an ingress easement from the Old Grade Road over here, which comes off of County Road 1, and then into their property. So their property is a little bit unique in that it's actually bisected by Clears Lake. So they were looking for a 33-foot easement to get to both the north side and the south side of their property. As a little bit of reference here, everything in red on the map is private property. Everything that is not shaded would be county tax forfeit land. And then also of note, there is an existing easement, this red kind of line here, to get to some other private property to the north. And then most of these, everything in green here was already existing, except for this little piece down here, which is just through a young forest. So like I mentioned, they're looking for a 33-foot wide easement to get to both the north and south side of their properties.
And there's no timber value based on the location of the easement. And then, so the north-south is an actual power line easement there, so you could drive that today if you wanted to. That's already wide open, so really the only part that would be, when they're taking that little dogleg off to the east, would really be something that would be the new part, so.
So, Madam Chair, a question, several questions in my head. Okay, so the red part is private?
Correct. Yes.
So remind me of how this works. Like, okay, so I go and I come to the county and there's a landlocked 40 and I buy the landlocked 40. By state statute, somehow somebody has to give me an easement or a cartway or something like that to get into my property, correct?
Typically, there's a cartway petition.
Okay. And so I'm assuming when you come forward with these easements, there's no other alternative for like a cartway going through there or right on the line or something like that. This is their only alternative for them to access their land?
Well, when we work with folks on these easements, we're trying to pick the easement that's the least imposition on the county. And so our goal is to try to find easements and access points that already have a cleared area that's already open. We want to minimize any sort of tree removal and any sort of wetland impacts, those sorts of issues. So that's why this, when the original request, to be honest, when you see where that comes in, they wanted to go kind of a straight across. It was all wet. It's hard to see, but that's all wetland. And we said, nope, we're not going to go that way because we're not going to be impacting wetlands. So that's why the jog would come up and then down and go over, was for that reason. So,
So another question is, so has the Land Services Department determined that this is not a chunk of land that down the road that we would say doesn't really fit into our forest management plan, and we might put it on the public auction? Because if that's the case, now we've just put an easement on there and that's just decreased the value of what we could get for this land. Does that make sense?
it does. I don't anticipate us wanting to sell this just because of the proximity to the old grade and for
The what?
access. Because with the old grade going through the road,
Okay.
I don't see this as being something that we would be interested in selling down the road.
And these properties also already have two easements that exist on them today. One for the power line, as you can see here, and then this red corridor as well is already an existing easement to get to the north.
Okay. And now, and one other question, John, I know you
Yeah.
and Commissioner Hoag have been working on something.
Yeah,
This isn't nothing to do.
This isn't in that area,
Oh,
no.
okay.
But now, what would happen then with the existing easement? Would he give up the existing easement, or he just wants an additional to the easement he's got?
The easement, the easement that's currently there in red is for a different,
Is the existing easement?
yep, it's for,
So that's already there?
yep,
Will that terminate?
no.
So he's just grabbing another easement off of our property or county property to access his land from a different point?
Yeah, and the one to the north that you see going up red, that's for a different landowner.
Huh?
It's the easement in red is for a different landowner, it's not for the one
Oh,
that's,
they're not all, the Trail Properties, Inc. isn't the same as the one above it?
just the areas that are in the blue blocks are the
Yeah.
properties that we're talking about.
And those easements, that existing easement is documented as a cartway, is it?
33, it's a
30 foot.
33-foot wide easements recorded.
Okay, two
Yep.
rod or whatever they call it. Okay.
Yep, yep.
I guess I got another question. So if somebody has the easement, is it actually in their name? I mean,
Yep,
Sort of. It
I mean,
runs
with the property.
So it's recorded to the current owners, and then as you transfer that property, the property rights go with it.
so if somebody, let's say Jim Johnson is on there with his four-wheeler, that guy can't, and he's on county property, he can't say, hey, this is my easement, get out of here. He can't do that. He can't kick anybody out of there,
It's
can he?
an ingress easement that allows them to gain access to their property. It does not preclude anybody else from riding a ATV, a four-wheeler, snowmobile in the winter down there on that. It's not, they don't have exclusive use of that easement, of that chunk of property. They just have, that gives them legal access now to get back to their property. They have legal recorded access.
So how long have they owned this property and why now? I mean, what's going on?
I don't know how long they've owned it. I didn't get those facts, but it's, from all that when we're looking at it is are there other options to get there? And this is the cleanest and the simplest way for them to gain access. And there's already easements in place, clearing in place, so it's a very minimal impact to the county, tax forfeit land for this easement.
Dr. Hool, what's the downside to this? Is there a downside, or?
It's a property right that you're giving away. If we were two private parties, I suspect we'd be having a conversation about how much money needs to change hands, but we are a public organization, and so it's already in the public's ownership. That tension between the rights of the individual property owner and the rights of the public are in tension here, but not a lot. This isn't a big deal.
Okay.
It's a small deal.
And we do value that easement parcel, and there is a payment for that.
Pay us for it?
Yep,
Okay, cool.
yep. And if you guys, our consensus is you think this is something that we can go forward with, next steps would be to get the easement surveyed, to get a legal description of that drawn up. And then we would work with our assessing team to figure out the value of that. And then all that would be put together, and then it would come to a subsequent county board meeting for final approval by the board.
But even down the road, when all of us are gone in 20 years and the land services staff says, we're gonna sell that, that easement goes along with that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Now, the old grade, which I've been on before, that is a road? Is it a publicly dedicated right-of-way? Is it a easement? It's on county property, correct?
Right. It's basically a minimum maintenance road that is, if I remember, Tom, this is a snowmobile trail for a lot of it in the wintertime, right? Up in Mill grade?
No, not quite.
Not quite.
So the first mile of the road is maintained by the township,
Yep.
and so it would be a township road, and then the rest would just be a normal forest road that we periodically maintain.
Is it a township road that they maintain, or is it just a publicly dedicated right-of-way in township property?
The first mile they maintain, the township does, Timothy Township.
Okay.
Then after that, again, it gets back to more of it's a township road with a prescriptive easement on it, just because of the use over the years for all the forest work we've done up there,
The whole old grade is that way?
once you get past that first mile.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like somebody can come in there and buy that property, or the county would sell that property. That easement would be listed on that sale, that old grade easement through there.
That would be, yeah, right, because it's.
I mean, is it documented?
We've recorded all the forest roads, gone through that process. Make sure all the forest roads are recorded, and so this would pop up as being one of those forest roads.
And so if I looked up the legal description of that property right now, even though it's county, it would show that there is a easement across that property, if it was owned by the county. Or is it just prescriptive?
That would require a title search.
Right.
If you want to look back into the history and you're a future buyer, you'd do a title search. And that's how those easements and whatever other encumbrances there are against the property would show up in an abstract search.
It should show up in an abstract, if it's been
Been
documented.
properly recorded, and the abstractor does the work right, it will show up.
If it isn't, even though we would make the assumption that I've always used that, you're making the assumption that it is an easement. If it isn't documented, it really isn't an easement.
Recorded.
Recorded, yeah,
Yeah,
I
recorded.
would say
That's not documented.
Yeah.
it sets in motion the potential for legal action. You can have an easement by use. In other words, you've used it for so many years, nobody's objected, there may be an easement by use. But that sets in motion probably legal action. Somebody has to sue someone in order to avail themselves of that right. Generally speaking, we don't like to be part of setting that up.
No.
And so if you want to just double check that the old grade has a good easement on it.
Sure. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, just a question, just trying to get some clarity. Thank you.
Just another curiosity question. So, let's say this isn't the county, and this is, somebody's doing an easement with somebody, and they signed the paperwork for the easement, but this person never went in and recorded it. And 20 years go by, and they have this in their safe, and maybe that person's passed away, and it's in their safe, and somebody says, well, I have an easement to go through this property. Oh, no, you don't have it. And then they pull this out of the safe 20 years later, but it never was recorded. Could they record it after 20 years, or Debbie's going?
I think they probably could.
They could?
I think they could. I think there are probably property ownership interests out there that are not accurate in our system because people are holding on to contracts for deed. A warranty deed would be awfully untypical to hold on to, but an easement, somebody could hold on to. It won't show up in a title search then. And that's why it's kind of silly to do it that way. It won't show up in a title search. And the whole idea of recording these documents is so that there is an accurate record of what the current encumbrances are. We're the keeper of the records. That said, some people have an interest in not appearing to own property that they actually appear to own, or they actually do own.
Yeah.
And so I have seen that as well.
And the reason why I asked that is because I got a little situation down in my area now where there's the plat for South Long Lake. About every 8 houses, there's like a 10-foot, I don't know what you'd call it, I guess you'd call it an easement, where the lots in the back would access the lake that way. And there's one that everybody thinks that it's 40 feet. And so now the neighbor is planting trees and moving big rocks in there and saying, nope, that's only 10 feet. So I went and talked to him, and he said, nope, I've got the paperwork in my safe. Well, I never saw the paperwork. So we're gonna go out there and survey it within the next week or two.
Right.
And if he's got the paperwork to prove that we're wrong, then I guess we're wrong, right?
Well, and so in that situation, what you'd be looking at, that would be public, that's a public right-of-way
Yeah.
road, and so the only way that would be vacated if it was done by the township.
That's exactly what I
So
told him.
if there's information that shows that the township vacated that and it hasn't been recorded, then you would be able to take that document and record it. I think the key to recording documents is that we're not the document police. We don't get to, tell people what they can and can't record.
Right.
And so people can record, anything they want. And so
Right.
they could bring that back, and then at that point, a title search, and then if it turns out that people think that that was incorrect, that's why lawyers get paid the big
Yeah.
bucks.
Okay, good conversation. I guess I don't have any issues with this, just kind of more trying to educate myself.
Yeah, good questions. They're good questions.
I always have a lot of good questions.
Yes,
Right, Renee?
you're your own biggest fan.
All right,
Good work, guys.
All right, if you're done, I guess we are.
I guess we're done now.
Consensus is to proceed? Okay. that's
Thank
what
you.
we'll do. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Debbie.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Today, I am coming before you with an update from the 2023 state legislative session as far as different changes that occurred with regard to elections legislation in particular. I know Mr. Hool showed you at the last meeting the synopsis we got from the MICA organization of the post-session review, which is extremely long, and we're still sifting through a lot of things. I've been sifting through this election legislation piece for a number of weeks now, and I think we're at a point where we can give you a high-level overview on a lot of the things that were changed, what's different, and some of the impacts that that's going to have on our administrative effort as well as the voters in Crow Wing County also. So I want to start with some good news. One of the things that did come out of this session that we've actually, as a statewide County Officers Association, been trying to work with the legislature on in the last several years is a dedicated funding source for elections. If you think about it, elections that are run at the county level include offices for federal, state, county, city, township, school district, hospital board, park board, in some circumstances, many, many different layers of government. However, there is no methodology under previous statute that allowed for any kind of charging back up, if you will. There was a method in statute that allowed us to charge local cities and townships and school districts for their portion of the offices that are on the ballot, but there was nothing that said, here's a way you can charge the state or the federal government for any type of races that they have on the ballot. So one of the things we've been talking about is the fact that these operations are becoming more technical in nature, or there's more work that's involved. There is a lot of cost that is associated with running an election. To give you a little bit of an idea, it costs us about between $250,000 and $300,000 per election cycle to run an election in Crow Wing County. And when I talk about an election cycle, that's basically leading up to one state general election. The years when we have 3 elections, as we will have coming forward in 2024, when we have a presidential nomination primary in March, a state primary in August, and a state general election in November, we're going to be pushing close to $400,000+ to run that year's elections for the citizens of Crow Wing County. So having a good funding partnership with the state has been something that we feel is a very important factor as we look forward. And I'm very happy to say that in this year's legislative session, there was the Voting Operations Technology and Election Resources, or the voter account. We went through several iterations to try to come up with a really good acronym, and we think this is a good one for this particular purpose. There's no question what these funds are supposed to be used for when it has that type of acronym. The voter account is an appropriation of $1.5 million allocated annually directly to counties for election expenses. $1.25 million annually. Our ask to come up to a kind of a level that we felt put some impact at that local level was $30 million. The final approval was at $1.25 million annually. How it is going to be split is 20% of that $1.25 million will be spread equally to all 87 counties. Every county in the state, regardless of how big or how small you are, has expenses that are related to elections. And even though there are some that are more directly applicable based on the number of voters that you have or how many ballots that you have to produce or whatever the case may be, every county has some expense. So 20% of that is going to be spread equally to all 87 counties. 80% of that 1.25 million will be allocated based on population, so that those that do have a higher number of voters are going to have a higher amount of allocation to help offset some of those per ballot, per voter type costs that are associated with elections. Our amount, based on that allocation for Crow Wing County, is about $15,000. So I just said it's going to cost us close to $400,000 to run elections in 2024, and we're going to get an allocation of about $15,000. It's better than nothing.
And this is the good news?
This is the good news, yes, this is the good news. The other part of this is that there is hope that this is a funding source that is also not just going to assist counties, but would also assist cities and townships as well, because again, they have expenses that are associated with elections also. So the way that the allocation agreement, or the way the statute is written, says that counties and cities have to enter into an agreement of how to expend that $15,000 that's coming to the county to be spent. If you don't come to an agreement, 75% of those funds go to the county, 25% of those funds get split equally to all cities and townships at the local level. We have 45 cities and townships in Crow Wing County. So 25% of that $15,000 allocation is about $3,700, about $3,750. And if I split that equally by 45 cities and townships, they'd get about $83 each.
Can I just so I can wrap my head around this, how many registered voters do we have in Crow Wing County? So I can I'm trying to compute.
I think we are, I was going to look this up yesterday and I forgot, but we are right around that 46,000 registered voters.
45,000, okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
And that puts us top middle of the state, if that makes sense. We're in that top 20-ish, if you will, of the number of registered voters.
Typically 16th largest.
Right. So $83 per municipality, usually the costs that are associated. One of the things that we have done here in Crow Wing County, cities and townships are paying for their election expenses from taxpayer dollars. The county is paying for our election expenses from taxpayer dollars. We have not chosen in the past to work that allocation to say, you have 3 inches of space on the ballot for your 2 township offices, so we're going to charge you X number of dollars for your ballot space. We have covered the cost of ballot preparation, programming, all the supplies and materials that are being put out to the polling places. Essentially, in Crow Wing County, the municipalities are responsible for their polling place location and whatever expenses might be necessary there, utilities or rent if they need to rent a location, and their expenses related to their election judges. They recruit and appoint their election judges. We do the training, they pay for the training, and they pay for their expenses on election day for their election judges. This is probably the part of how our agreement is going to be structured with our cities and townships, is instead of giving them $83 to try to pay for a little bit of their election judges, we'll probably look at how we're going to manage that agreement with those municipalities. But we are, as a state organization, working on a template agreement that will be able to be shared amongst counties to be able to be worked out amongst their cities and townships. So the good news is there will be some dollars that are coming, and this is an annual appropriation. It will be coming forward in 2023. Actually, we'll be getting that funding sometime here in the next month or so. Some of the things that can be used for, you can use it for equipment, hardware, or software purchases. Equipment replacement, we've talked about this over the last several years. Equipment, to replace our equipment is about $280,000 to $300,000 to replace vote tabulating equipment at a county-wide level. So these funds can be put into a restricted fund that could be used to roll over from year to year to help fund what the cost of replacement of equipment would necessarily need to be. You can use it for security infrastructure, including cybersecurity infrastructure. You could use it for capital improvements to polling places to improve accessibility. You can use it for staff costs. Oftentimes, when you have grant funding or you have funding that comes from another source, it can't always be used to offset staffing costs. In this case, it can, both permanent staff and temporary staff. You might recall we also get some dollars in the presidential election year to help offset some of the costs of the presidential nomination primary. The amount that we can recoup in that regard covers about a third-ish of the costs associated, because we can only recoup overtime or temporary staff time in that regard. We cannot pay for permanent staff out of that funding stream. This one we can. It can cover election judge costs, printing and publishing, postage, programming. You can use it as a local match for any federal or state grants that might be coming through, and basically any other purchase directly related to elections. So you will have some reporting that's going to have to be done. We have to report to the Secretary of State's office by December 31st every year as far as what was spent and how much is being rolled over into that restricted fund. And then the first funding is actually going to be coming probably around July 20th. So we should be getting that first $15,000-ish coming from the state sometime in the next week.
So restricted dollars, so it isn't that we're restricting them, it's the restricted dollars that we're receiving, correct? I mean, we're not
Correct,
saying,
both.
we're not setting aside property tax dollars that we're restricting.
No.
This is money that, okay, I understand.
We will not be setting aside property tax dollars for that purpose, but these funds that we receive, this $15,000 that we receive, is restricted for the use only for elections-related items. Just like some of our other dollars that we get from federal or state funding sources. So, more to come on this. We will not have to report on it until December of 2024. It's the end of the next fiscal year that we will be pulling those resource responses for. And then we'll get that first funding stream this year, and then we'll get another funding stream again in July of 2024. And it is put in statute right now that that will continue annually until the legislature should change that law again in the future. Maybe the next time I come with you, it'll be with better news that we were able to increase the allocation amount to that account. Another stream of funding that was approved this year is for accessibility grants. $500,000 was allocated for polling place improvements for accessibility improvements, and this is also available to counties or municipalities if they need to make some accessibility improvements to polling places. That might be automatic door opener buttons, ramps, whatever it might be. We've had some municipalities take advantage of these funding streams in the past, and I'm hopeful that if there are needs that some of our local cities or townships have, this will be another opportunity for them to do so.
So 500,000, that isn't just for us?
Statewide,
Oh, good Lord, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
It's not gonna go far. This is a matching grant typically, and it's typically, usually in this regard, it is a 25% grant to a 75% match. But it gives a little bit of amount to help in that regard. So that was all the money that we got out of the deal, basically. But now let's talk a little bit about some of the policy changes that occurred, and there were several. I'm going to talk first around some of the voter registration side of things. One of the first bills that passed this year was the Felon Voting Rights Restoration Act. And basically, in the past, if a person was convicted of a felony in Minnesota, what the law said was that their right to vote was not restored until they had completed all aspects of their sentence. That included any incarceration time, it included any probation or in parole situations. So a voter, while they may not be in prison anymore, they still were not able to vote until their rights had been restored because they had fully completed all aspects of their sentence, including probation. This did cause some issues. The Department of Corrections is supposed to communicate with these folks when they are released from prison to let them know that their right hasn't been restored yet, or when their rights are restored to let them know that they are eligible to vote. We had set up a program in Crow Wing County where if someone had a felony record that appeared on their voter registration record, because of the fact that we do coordinate and communicate with court systems when there are felony charges that occur, If it still showed as a felony on their record, we would communicate with the county attorney's office. County attorney's office would do some checking to see if that person had completed their sentence and if their rights were restored, and that would determine whether or not that person was allowed to vote or not again. The way the law has changed now is if they are no longer incarcerated, their right to vote has been restored to them. So basically, if they are standing in front of the election judge on election day and they meet all the other criteria that are listed on the voter registration application, the fact that they may have not completed the probation or parole portion of their sentence does not preclude them from being able to vote. Once they are no longer incarcerated, they will be allowed to have those votes restored. I should add there are a couple of things that we are currently working on in that regard, updating some of those communication change with the court system and Department of Corrections to update those voter registration records that currently have a felony notation on them so that we can make sure that our records and our voter rolls are as clean as possible.
When that would happen, Deb, in the past, if somebody walked up and just walked up to vote, you would actually look, somebody would see in a record that they're a felon and says, "I'm sorry, you're not eligible to vote."
Yes.
Did that happen?
Yes, that did happen. We've often had that happen, in fact, either at the polling place on election day or at the courthouse leading up to election day during the absentee voting section. We would have folks who would come in and it would appear that there is a felony record on their voter registration notation. Like I said, we would communicate with the county attorney's office. If the attorney's office came back and said, nope, their sentence has been completed, all their rights have been restored, we can clear that challenge and allow that voter to vote because they were eligible to do so. But there were circumstances where they still had a year of probation or a couple years of probation, and so we had to inform them of the fact that their sentence was not complete and that they were not eligible to vote. Because if they did vote when they were under felony status still, it's another felony, and that would extend their sentence even longer.
So in the areas in the county that we do mail voting, they would have never been mailed a ballot?
Correct. If it was that type of a
Even if it was,
situation.
even if they had maybe, you hadn't got the homework done on it yet, from the
Correct.
court system, you wouldn't have sent them one?
Correct. If they have a felony notation and they're in a mail ballot precinct, a ballot would not automatically be mailed to them. If they knew that they had completed all aspects of their probation and their sentence, they would have to apply to us to receive a ballot.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, otherwise they'd just go, I didn't get a ballot, so I
Right.
guess I'm not eligible to vote, even
Right.
though they might have been eligible to vote.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
There was also a new law change that allows for pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Basically, they can complete a voter registration application that will get them pre-registered to vote, so when they turn 18, they will automatically be registered. This used to apply to 17-year-olds who were going to be 18 by the next election day. So if you were 17 and you were going to turn 18 on November 1st, you could pre-register to vote so that you were registered and on the voter rolls on election day, so that you wouldn't have to go through that election day registration process. This now applies to 16 and 17-year-olds. They will not be active on any voter lists or any public information lists or any voter rosters or any voter rolls until after they turn 18. But they do have the opportunity to complete a voter registration application to get pre-registered. The other piece around voter registration is automatic voter registration. Sometimes you hear this called motor voter in other states, where when you apply for a driver's license update or change or a new driver's license, it would automatically update you to your voter registration record, either register you or update your voter registration record. Previously, Minnesota was an opt-in state. You had to check the box on the bottom of the driver's license application that says, I want to register to vote. In this case now, when you register for a driver's license, you are automatically going to be registered to vote. The Secretary of State's office is going to send you a notice that says, you applied for a driver's license, your voter registration record has been updated to register you to vote. You're now registered at this address and you have 20 days to opt out of this registration if you wish to do so. And they will need to contact our office if they want to change that from not being registered or not updated to that address. This only applies to voters who provide citizenship documentation when they apply for a driver's license. So it's basically if they apply for a real ID or enhanced ID, this is the only time that that applies. It will not apply to just a regular driver's license. And if you recall, one of the other items that was passed at the legislature was driver's license for all, the fact that non-citizens could receive a driver's license. Even if they receive a driver's license, they're not automatically going to get registered to vote because they were not providing citizenship with that method of driver's license.
Question.
Yes.
16-year-old getting his driver's license for the first time, wanting the enhanced license. He automatically goes on that, he isn't going to be on the roll, but he's going to be pre-registered to vote, so when he becomes 18, he can vote?
No. In the case of 16 and 17-year-olds, they actually have to request and fill out a voter registration application to be pre-registered to vote. This only applies to 18 and older who have provided that citizenship piece.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a question too. This is just, because I know, there's been people concerned, and I've asked you 8 ways to Sunday about if anybody can do something fraudulently, so I just thought of an example of a fraudulent thing that you just brought up. Okay, so let's say I was living in Morrison County. I changed my driver's license. Okay, so I'm living in Morrison County. And let's say I'm living in a district that's, or a precinct that's vote by mail, okay? And so the election's 6 months away, but now I've moved to Crow Wing County. And I get that, I'm still getting my mail, and I get that ballot down there. They mail it to me, and I fill it out. And let's say I'm a bad guy, but I'm living up here, and then I go into Crow Wing Township, and I say, I'd like to vote today, and then here's where I live. Can that person vote down in Morrison County and vote here?
No, and here's a couple reasons how it's going to get caught. Number one, if you are living in Morrison County and you're registered to vote, I love that you're thinking of how I can fraud the system.
I'm trying to.
It's a game we play around here.
Instead, ask
I
questions.
love this game. It's one of my favorites. So if you are in Morrison County, you're living in a mail ballot district, and they send you a ballot, okay? Those ballots get sent out about 30 days, 20 to 30 days before Election Day. So you might have been living down here, and 6 months ago, you moved over to your South Long Lake location, okay? However, if you moved, that ballot's not going to get mailed to you in Morrison County, number one, because we are already communicating with Morrison County, because if you applied for a driver's license that changed you to live over here in South Long Lake, Morrison County is going to say he no longer lives here, inactive, he doesn't get a mail ballot, your record is moved to Crow Wing County, to the South Long Lake location. Let's say you haven't changed your driver's license yet,
Right.
okay? That you're still living in Morrison County, you got that ballot sent to you, you filled it out and sent it back to Morrison County. You have to have a proof of residence to come into Crow Wing, into South Long Lakes Township that day and say, I want to vote and register here today. What is your proof of residence of where you live now here in South Long Lake?
What if I bring you my utility bill and some other bill from that address, but I haven't changed my driver's license yet?
And that is allowed. You can have a driver's license that isn't changed, that has the old address, and you have that new one. You could, in theory, register and vote.
Yeah.
You're signing a document that says, I state that I live at this address and I have not voted at any other location yet this year, and this is punishable by a felony sentence of 10 years in prison, fine of $20,000 or both. So if you are willing, and we will catch you, because when we take your application back and put it into our system, it's going to say, oh, Paul Coring voted in Morrison County at this address by mail ballot that was accepted, and he was voting here with a ballot that was accepted, and Don Ryan is going to give you a phone call. And actually, the investigators in Sheriff Klang's office are
Hello,
going
Don?
to give you. Yeah. So
I
is
won
it,
by one vote.
so is it
Don't
possible?
quote me on that one.
It's already in. Way to go, way to go. Quote him.
Is it possible? Yes. Is it going to get caught? Yes. And is it going to get prosecuted? Yes.
Okay.
And all of those things have happened in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I do want to point out that we were really pushed for, if you will, at a state level, was to have the Secretary of State's office be responsible for coordination of mailing and the costs associated with mailing of the notices for automatic registration. Right now, when people register to vote, when there is a process where you update or you register for the first time, you know, you get those little cards, postcards in the mail that says, here's where your polling location is. We are paying for the costs of those. I have no problem with paying for the costs of the ones for the folks who actually are going through the effort of registering to vote. We have to pay what the costs of those cards are. These notices, you can't fit all the information on a postcard. It's going to have to be letter size, which means higher postage, more cost involved with generating those notices and sending them out. Right now at the postcard level, they are an automated process that gets handled through another mailing vendor, so we just get the bill basically for what those are. What we did ask is that the Secretary of State's office be responsible for sending out all the notices that are in the, if you want to opt out in the next 20-day notice, they're responsible for sending those out and the costs that are associated with sending those notices. Folks will still need to contact our office if they want to opt out of that voter registration piece, but that number will be significantly less, and we'll be dealing with less of that than the administrative costs associated with generating and mailing those notices as well. So that's one thing I should add on the voter registration piece. Automatic voter registration requires the DVS, Department of Vehicle Services, to have all of their system in place by December 1st of 2023. The Secretary of State's office has to do testing to make sure that it will work with the statewide voter registration system and certify that that system is ready to go prior to the implementation of automatic voter registration. So that will not be expected to be done until closer to the end of Q2 of 2024. We are probably looking at a June 1st, 24 implementation date for automatic voter registration. Pre-registration and felon restoration are already in effect as of June 1st of 2023. Early voting, let's talk a little bit around absentee voting. So that was the voter registration pieces. Let's talk about what changes there are in absentee voting, and there were several there also.
Deb, when you say absentee, absentee and early voting is the same, you're talking about the same thing?
Yep.
Okay. But it has changed, I mean.
Correct.
When it used to be absentee voting, it was, you had to have an excuse, but now that you don't have to have an excuse.
Correct. So if you recall, prior to 2014, you had to have one of 4 reasons why you were voting by absentee ballot. You were going to be out of the precinct on election day. You were serving as an election judge in a different precinct on another day. You had an illness or disability that prevented you from going to the polling place on election day, or you had a religious observance that prevented you from going to the polling place on election day. Those were the 4 reasons why you could vote for by absentee ballot. In 2014, Minnesota legislature adopted no excuses absentee voting, which means anybody can vote by absentee ballot just because they feel like it, just because they want to. You didn't have to have one of those 4 reasons, or like we always used to say, you didn't have to lie to get to vote by absentee ballot, because everybody would check the box that said, I'll be gone, whether they were going to be gone or not. So no excuses absentee voting has been in place since 2014 in Minnesota. And a lot of states basically call this early voting. Early voting and no excuse absentee voting have very similar connotations and basically mean the same thing. In this legislative cycle, the legislature adopted true early voting. And the only difference is when you have no excuse absentee voting, the voter still has to fill out an application. If anybody has voted at our counter during the 45 days before election day, the first step of that process is filling out an application that says, I want to vote by absentee ballot. We have a lot of voters who get confused, who are saying, I'm not voting by absentee ballot. I'm voting in person here today to cast my ballot. I'm voting early. Well, we didn't have early voting up until now. You still had to fill out that application because you were absent from your polling place on election day. Now with early voting, there will not be the application process. This will be more like coming into the polling place on election day. We'll probably have some additional staff, temporary workers, who are going to have rosters, election day rosters that folks will check in with. We have to create a connection into the statewide voter registration system, because just like with absentee voting, once you cast a ballot for early voting, it automatically has to update that in the voter registration system to show that you've already voted and you can't vote again. So that also prevents anybody from finding a way. I know, took that one away from you too. This is a good thing. Early voting versus absentee. Early voting is a good thing. It reduces the touch points of that ballot from 9 to 3. Right now, if somebody is voting by absentee ballot, it has a potential to have up to 9 touch points if they vote where they actually are using the envelope process, or even if they vote at our counter through an absentee ballot process. Here's the thing about early voting. Like I said, it needs to have some details worked out between SVRS and which is our statewide voter registration system, needs to have some enhancements to be able to accommodate early voting. This law becomes effective when the Secretary of State's office certifies that SVS is ready to be used. Within 80 days of that certification is when it has to be ready for use at the local level.
Okay, so another question. So, how do I explain this? Okay, so before I would fill out an application, and then I would vote.
Yep.
And then they'd put it in an envelope and they'd seal it up. Nobody would look at that until
7 days
7 days before. And then your staff would
Election judges
run
would
them through the
open 'em.
machine.
Yep, correct.
But then, when was that updated so that when I go out to Long Lake Township and I say, hey, Virginia, I want to vote, and she says, no, you can't vote. When was that updated?
Okay, so in that process, we use the envelope starting 45 days before Election Day. That's when the voting process starts for Minnesota. And up until 7 days before, we were utilizing those envelopes. If someone came into wanting to vote, they would put those into that envelope, the whole process.
All right.
7 days before, election judges would review those and process them and mark them, scan them through the tabulator. However, even during that 45-day window, every 3 to 5 days, election judges were looking at that envelope to determine whether that ballot could be accepted or rejected. And if you recall, what they're looking at is, did you sign it? Did you sign the envelope, not the ballot? They're not opening the ballot envelopes. Remember, when you vote by absentee ballot, there are 3 envelopes that are involved. You put your ballot in the secrecy envelope. Secrecy envelope goes in the signature envelope. Signature envelope goes in the envelope to mail it back here, basically, is what's involved. So they're looking at that signature envelope. Did you sign it? Did your witness sign it? And did you place your ID number, which matches what the ID number was that you put on the application? If that could be all accepted, that ballot was already updated into SVRS to mark it as accepted. And when we make those updates to that polling book to send it out to the polling place, all of that information is already updated into that roster. So there is a record on your ballot line or on your voter registration line that says, Paul already voted by absentee ballot, he can't vote here again on election day. We would do that starting that 3 to 5 days. 7 days before, when we can start scanning or when we can start processing, those voters who are coming to the counter to vote in person already were placing their ballots directly into the tabulator. They weren't placing them into the envelope at that point. We update those rosters up until Monday at about 2, 3 o'clock is when we run that last update to get everybody who has voted before Monday at 3 o'clock is loaded onto the roster. Those election judges who are picking up their supplies on Monday, they provide us with a telephone number, and we call them at about 6, 7 o'clock Monday night to say, here are more people who voted between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock that you need to update your roster. We call the polling places on Tuesday once we get our mail, and election judges have looked through whatever came in Tuesday's mail to update whether or not those people have accepted absentee ballots, and before they get processed, we communicate out to the polling location to say, hey, we have a ballot here for Doug Hogue. Did Doug already vote at the polling place? If they say yes, we do not process their absentee ballot. If they say no, we say, okay, mark Doug's record as having voted by absentee ballot, and then we process his absentee ballot at that point.
So, I hope I'm not prolonging this. Am I prolonging this?
We got nothing else on the agenda today.
So,
I'm here all day.
okay.
We might be too.
Yeah, I'm looking, I got other things. No, this is really good.
So the tabulator, I'm trying to just get at, the people that were, used to come here and that were really worried. I'm trying to answer questions that they might have and show them that I believe that things are secure. And that's what I'm trying to get at. And obviously I'm trying to trip you up and see if I can, not intentionally, but to see if there's any cracks in it, which I don't believe there is. So when they take the machine, the tabulator machine out to Long Lake Township and people vote and they put their their ballot in there and it tabulates that information, it's not connected to the internet
No.
whatsoever. Okay, so then they bring the machines back here and you put something in there to gather that tabulation stuff out of there. What about the people that have voted? When do those people that had voted before at Long Lake, like absentee or early voting, when does that all merge together with?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
So when the polling places out at the polling places, so let's pick on South Long Lake, since
Yeah.
you're always good to pick on Long Lake Township.
Yeah.
They have their tabulator out there. At the end of the night, they're going to print the tape off their tabulator. That's going to show them what the votes that were cast at that polling location were for those people that were there. They have to reconcile the number of ballots that were cast. So if 322 people came in, checked in on their roster, they're going to see on their roster 322 people checked in. They're going to count the little slips that everybody signed on. They're going to count those and they're going to find 322 little slips. That was the number of people who signed in. That matches the number that was on the electronic roster. They're going to count the number of voter receipts that they received. Let's take a pause and talk about this process. When you come in to vote on election day, you go to the first judge, they ask you your name, or they say, oh, hi, Paul, let me look you up.
Yep.
They find your name, they mark it in as checked in on the roster. It prints off a little voter's oath, is what we call it. You read the oath, and you sign that. That's just like signing the old paper roster. If you recall the big giant book, you would go to the paper roster, they would find your name on that page, they'd turn it around and let you sign it, and you'd say, oh, how come so-and-so hasn't been in here yet? Or, oh, Grandma Jones has already voted, I wonder how she voted. That was the thing about the paper rosters, was the other 12 people on that page, you knew whether or not they had already been in to vote or did not come to vote. And if you recall, whether or not you vote is just as secret as how you vote. So that is part of the privacy that the electronic rosters provide. It no longer has the 10 other people that are on that page for you to see. You see your record, which you are absolutely should be looking at, your own record, not everybody else's, who just happens to be alphabetically near where you are.
Yeah.
Or sitting there during the day and looking through the roster to see, I wonder when John's going to come in. He's usually here by now. Where's he at today? Does anybody know where he is? Anyway, you get checked in, you sign that oath. You take that oath, the voter or the judge gives the voter what's called a voter receipt. You take your voter receipt to another judge who says, oh yeah, okay, so you really went through this process, you got checked in, we verified you are here, you signed that oath that attested to all those things that make you eligible, and you got your voter receipt, now I can give you a ballot. So that's that double check of one judge checks you in, one judge issues you the ballot. And we've talked about this with our election judges. Sometimes their table is this big, and they're sitting side by side, and the election judge signs you in, and they hand the voter's receipt over to the other judge who gives you your ballot. That is not how it should be. And if that is happening in a polling place, the voter should be saying, wait a minute, I should be getting that little slip because it says voter's receipt. You're exchanging your receipt for your ballot. So the judge gives you the receipt, the voter takes it to the next station and gets their ballot, then they place it into the tabulator after they voted it. So those judges at the end of the night are seeing 322 people voted on the rosters, 322 signature oaths of people who signed, 322 voter receipts from that other judge's station where they exchanged their ballots, And there are 322 votes on the tabulator, 322 ballots in the ballot box. Those things all have to match up before they leave. They come into the courthouse. We've done those same processes with the absentee systems. We upload the 2 files individually, so there is a polling place file and an absentee file, and then when that gets sent to the Secretary of State's office, it reports as one result for that entire precinct. So while there are 2 sets of results, by law, we can only report full results for a precinct. So you have to have both polling place and absentee results reported together.
So if somebody says, you know, I know there was some people said, "No, I never voted absentee ballot," but they came here and voted early voting.
Correct.
But we will know that they.
Correct. And in most of those cases, they said, well, I didn't vote by absentee ballot, and then we showed them their application where they signed for an absentee ballot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deb, I have a question. A lot of discussion was about algorithms. Can you explain that to me so I understand? Is there any possibility that the computers could do anything?
So think about, there are 2 things. Anytime that you have a computer process, there is probably ways that things could be changed, right? There could be something that could happen to that. Here's the thing. We are not using the computers to cast the votes. We are using the computers to scan what has been listed on that paper ballot. Think back to when you used to take tests in schools with your number 2 pencil on the bubble sheet.
Yep.
I know some of you aren't that old that you can't remember that. You know, we had the Scantron where you had to fill in the bubble with your number 2 pencil, and there was this giant machine that was probably down in the teacher's break room that they had to listen to, where the teachers would run those slips through to scan those tests. That's basically what an optical scan system is. It's reading a mark on a piece of paper that determines what that mark target should be. Which is why when we do our hand count review, when we do the audit after the election, and we verify the hand count of the ballots to the machine count, they come out the same. There's nothing that is being done with an algorithm to flip a vote or to change a vote in the paper-based system that we have. Now, are there some states that do have systems that are based where you could utilize a touch screen type of a situation and not have any kind of a receipt for it? Perhaps. That is not the best practice that most people should adopt, and having that paper trail as that official trail is the important piece that is that backup for that. The other thing we heard about with algorithms is the algorithms that were used to randomize cast vote records, which we're going to talk about later in the presentation, that the algorithm could be hacked to figure out how it was randomized. And the legislature did address a little bit of that this year too.
I have a question, Deb.
Yes.
You're known in the area, you're known in the state to be like an expert in voting.
I'm known as someone who flaps my jaws a lot, yes.
Oh, you have and now from our side of it, we're trying to figure out little loopholes or something like that. From your side of it, how would you do it? How would you, knowing what you know, could you figure out a way of tricking the system?
To figure out a way to trick the system, well, there's 2 things I'm going to say. Number 1, part of the safety of the system is not relaying what the issues that are the vulnerabilities of the system could be, okay? So I'm probably not going to tell you if there was a way to trick it, that it could be tricked, but here's what I will tell you. Because of the different levels of safeguards, you basically would have to go to a different state to be able, you'd have to vote in one state and another, which is possibly still going to get picked up, because we do share information across state lines as well. In our paper-based system that is decentralized the way that it is, I don't know that there is a valid way you could commit voter fraud in Minnesota.
And that you could do it repeatedly to actually make any
To
difference?
have any impact on an election outcome, no.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things I want to talk about with this early voting piece. Now, as I said, we're going to end up with an early voting that comes into play without having to fill out the absentee applications anymore. Early voting is going to start 18 days before the election. So what we had was before this direct ballot process that started 7 days before, at the 7-day window, voters could come into our office and directly feed their ballot into the tabulator, just like they would on election day. That's now going to expand to 18 days before election day, that they can come in and do that. They've also expanded when we can start processing absentee ballots and mail ballots from 7 days before the election to 18 days. That's a good thing, giving us a little bit more window as we start to see more people who are choosing to vote by absentee ballot. Having a little bit more of a window to be able to process those ballots is a good thing. Anybody who votes by the envelope method, there's still going to be 9 touch points associated with that envelope method, even with an early voting concept, because they're utilizing those same processes of the 9 envelopes. And we are at a point where we have somewhere between 28 and 30% of our voters choose to vote by absentee ballot before election day, as of the last election cycle. So with that rate, having a couple extra days to do that processing is a really good thing. As I mentioned, SVRS has to be updated to be able to handle early voting. The Secretary of State's office does not anticipate that happening until 2026. So for the 2024 presidential election cycle, we will still be using the absentee model and the no excuse absentee model and the direct balloting model, but they will start 18 days before the election instead of 7 days before the election. Here's the piece that really has some impact to us at a local level, and these provisions are going to have impact on our bottom line dollars as well. In addition to expanding early voting to 18 days instead of 7, the state also put in required additional hours for absentee and early voting, including the 2 Saturdays before Election Day from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Tuesday, 1 week before Election Day, up until 7 p.m., the Sunday before Election Day from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and Monday before election until 5 p.m. We had asked the legislature to cut off the early voting period a little earlier on that Monday. Ideally, we would have loved to see early voting end like Saturday before Election Day. At a minimum Monday at noon or even 3 p.m. because as I said, we have to continue to get all those updated and get everything out to the polling places. So when we have until 5 p.m. on Monday where people can come in and vote, yes, we are still going to we'll be calling those election judges at 8, 9, 10 o'clock on Monday night to get all of those rosters updated so those polling places are ready to go. Here's the concern that we had with these hours. We already had required hours in statute of Saturday before Election Day from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. statewide. This was a requirement that everybody had to be open 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the Saturday before Election Day and Monday until 5 for folks who wanted to be able to vote by absentee ballot. One of the things we asked was don't put a limit on additional hours if a jurisdiction feels that it's important for them to have additional hours. In the past, here in Crow Wing County, we've been open 1 or 2 weekends or weeknights prior to Election Day to let folks vote later hours. We did voluntarily open the second Saturday before Election Day to allow for additional voting in 2020. So we did have opportunities where we were able to meet the needs of our citizens, our voters here in Crow Wing County. With these required hours, we don't have that flexibility anymore. We are going to have to absorb the cost of staffing a polling place here at the courthouse on all of those hours that are required, possibly with not a lot of turnout on some or many of those days. One thing we were successful at was getting them to agree to only make those hours applicable to a state general election. So for the presidential nomination primary, for the state primary elections, for any special elections, you only have to be open the Saturday before Election Day from 9 to 3 and Monday until 5. So those extra hours only apply to a state general election. And even though early voting is not expected to happen until 2026, These hours go into play June 1st of 2023, because the way it's worded in statute is it is voting before Election Day. So regardless if it is through the envelope method, through the direct ballot method, or through early voting, these expanded hours will be required starting any elections here forward. This was a disappointing loss as when we talk about the good news with the funding, this was a disappointing loss. This took away the local control that gives us the ability to serve our communities at a rate that also added expanded costs associated for some of those jurisdictions that really can least afford it. When we did bring that up, the comment was, well, we're giving you more money. Well, I don't know that the $15,000 we're going to get is going to offset all of these extra requirements as well. But
In Crow Wing County, the county is the only place that this is happening.
Correct.
It isn't happening in any cities in the county.
correct. In Crow Wing County, we do the absentee voting for all the municipalities here at the county. There are some counties where there are cities who have been tasked to do their own absentee voting for those municipalities. These hours would apply to them as well if they were doing that. I have heard some anecdotal evidence from some cities who are like, I don't think we're going to be doing absentee voting anymore if we have to make our staff work Saturday, Sunday before an election day when they're already pretty burned out as it is. So I do see some challenges for this coming up in 2024 that we're going to hear more about it. This was a bit of a disappointment. The fact of trying to keep things standardized for a political party is not necessarily a really good use of taxpayer dollars, in my opinion.
What do you mean by that?
So when we asked why it was so important to have everybody have the same hours instead of having that local control of having additional hours, the answer was, well, the political parties like to have standardized information for their literature so that they can put out information to the voters and they can say, you can go anywhere on the Sunday before Election Day and be able to vote.
Do you suppose this is the same issue in Hennepin County as it is in Traverse?
Of course not. Hennepin County has a much greater need for this than they do in Traverse County. And that was why we were so critical about wanting to keep things at local level control. Having a set block of standardized hours, but then let those locals figure it out.
And how many other ways are we supporting our political parties in the election process?
Well, we're running the presidential nomination primary, which is basically a political party exercise on behalf of the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota. Again, that's one of those things where the state does provide some reimbursement. We did not get full reimbursement in 2020 for the presidential nomination primary, and I highly doubt we will get full reimbursement for our expenses in 2024 either.
Some of these exercises are not to support the democracy. Some of these exercises are to support the political parties. And I do like to draw the distinction because the one is an exercise in partisanship and the other is an exercise in democracy. They're not the same.
We talk a lot about being able to go into a polling place in Traverse County or Lake of the Woods County or Crow Wing County or Washington County, whatever it might be. Your experience at the polling place should be exactly the same. How that administrative effort is applied and these type of expanded services leading up to that should be left to the locals to determine what hours do our citizens need for that to be. Because while we're getting $15,000, Traverse County is probably getting $2,000 of that funding, and this cost right here is going to cost them more than $2,000.
Do you have an idea in your head what it's gonna cost us?
I do not yet,
But
but I will be tracking that
Yeah, because
data.
you're gonna bring it up to us so we can make, yes.
Yes,
Okay, so
we will be tracking the data in 2024 as far as how much these extra hours do cost. Not only our costs, but what's the per voter served rate? How many people actually are going to come in to vote on the Sunday before Election Day? What are we going to see for that? We will be tracking all of that data.
What did you mean by that, so we can make what?
We have to make the decision to take levy dollars to put into this, correct? We don't have a choice. We're given that unfunded mandate and the fact that we have to do it. You know, and I hate to look at voting as a cost, but there is a cost in it.
There is a cost associated with it, absolutely. Yep.
That's what I meant, Paul,
Okay,
just to help clarify that for you.
It's going to cost us at least $4,000
Right,
in my head, and that's for one staff. and
Right.
$8,000 for two. which you need.
You got to have at least
You
2.
can't have one.
In fact,
And so, of our 15 grand, this probably eats at least half of it.
we have a minimum of 3 staff we require, because if we do have a circumstance where we have a voter who needs to utilize a curbside voting situation or needs voting assistance, you need 2 people who are doing that. You still need 1 person to be able to keep the office secure and manage the other voters as well.
That's 3/4 of it gone.
So, and don't forget that $83 we got to coordinate with the municipalities to make sure we pay them.
It's gone.
It's gone. Couple other things around absentee voting. Here's another one that's going to have some impact on folks, the permanent absentee status. For years, it has been a case where voters could sign up on an application to say, I want to receive an absentee ballot for every election. The application said, I want to receive an absentee ballot application for every election that I am eligible for. So instead of having to fill out that form for every election, they wanted to just be able to check the box and have it sent and say, hey, always send me an absentee ballot. I always want to receive one. This has been in play for a long time to get the absentee ballot application, and was mainly geared towards snowbirds who always wanted to leave before the election. They wanted to make sure that they didn't miss that window and always have that application sent to them. This now has changed to say they can say, don't send me an application, send me a ballot directly. I've already said I want an application for every election that I am eligible for. Please send me a ballot now without me having to fill out this application again. This will need to be updated. The voter registration application will be updated to include an option for the voter to select if they want to automatically receive an absentee ballot sent to them. There is some cleanup work that has to be done around what our existing application list. We'll have to communicate with those voters that are on that existing list and say, do you still wish to remain on the absentee voting list? And if so, you need to fill out the new application that says, send me a ballot before every election. This law is effective June 1st of 2024, so we have some time to work into that. A couple things around processing absentee administration. The absentee ballot return deadline is now standardized at 8 p.m. for all types of ballots. In the past, we had a deadline of 8 p.m. for mail ballot precincts had to be returned by 8 p.m. All other ballots had to be returned by 3 p.m. on election day. It's now been standardized to say, unless they were delivered by package delivery, which allowed FedEx or UPS or one of those to bring them up until 8 p.m. So it's now been standardized to say all absentee ballots can be returned up until 8 p.m. on election night. And then healthcare voting. Healthcare facility voting is an outreach program where this typically affects mostly our cities and municipalities that have nursing homes. There was a language in the law that allowed election judges from the municipality to go to the nursing homes to assist those voters who could not either get to the location, their polling location, or who needed some additional assistance. Whenever election judges are providing voter assistance, they have to do it in teams of 2 representing different political parties. So this was basically taking the polling place process to the nursing home and allowing those residents to vote with assistance of the election judges.
So back to, just going to go back a little bit. So the 8 p.m. on election night, that is the drop dead when you, so, okay, so let's say our staff goes to the mailbox on Thursday and there's 3 ballots there.
Too late.
Too late. What do you do with those 3 ballots?
So those 3 ballots, they get voter history credit. If we receive ballots that come in after 8 p.m. on election day, their voter record will get updated to say you voted in this election, but the envelope never even gets opened. The ballot never gets looked at. The ballot gets rejected. A letter gets sent to them saying, here, your ballot was received, but it was received too late. We were not able to process your absentee ballot, but you get history so you don't fall off the voter rolls because you have to vote at least once every 4 years.
What if those 3 voters were for me?
Sorry, they didn't get here on time.
Bad for you.
That would be bad for you. I do need to give a shout out to our local post office. As much of the challenges that the post office has seen over the last few years, the workers at our local post office have put a priority on getting absolutely every ballot possible to us as soon as absolutely possible. They make 3 or 4 trips a day
from their office to us. Whenever one comes through their processing in those last couple of days, they are making special trips to bring ballots over to us to make sure that everything gets in before election night is over. Yep. So with the healthcare outreach, now this has been expanded to not just be nursing homes. It now includes assisted living facilities, veterans homes, and domestic abuse shelters if requested. Veterans homes are required that they have to do voter outreach at the veterans homes. There is not a veterans home in Crow Wing County. There are only 3 in the state that have that requirement. Domestic abuse shelters and assisted living shelters can request, and by mutual agreement of the city clerk or the county auditor, have healthcare outreach expanded to have those election judges go there on election day, or leading up to election day.
Okay, so who goes down to Bethany or Woodland and brings the ballots around to the?
Yep, that's exactly what this process is.
Right, but who would do that?
That is election judges appointed by the city that are wherever that is, whether it's Bethany or in Cuyuna.
And it's either, it's,
One of one party and one of another party.
okay.
So with those, they go through an extra,
Is the election judge, okay, so Tim is laying there in his bed, and he's been through a lot of county stuff, so his mind is kind of messed up, and he's got the kind of beginnings of Alzheimer's, and so who determines whether Tim should vote or not?
Tim,
If I'll vote, and then,
unless Tim is under guardian,
A vote, I don't get to vote.
so are all all 3 people sitting right there by Tim?
Yes.
So if it's the Democrat or the Republican, they say, hey, you want to vote for Biden, or you want to, then, yeah, you want to vote for Trump? I mean, how do they?
So
I guess I'm just.
the election
I don't-
judges?
I'm not trying to make light of this.
No, but you're right.
Because if you remember, there was, some group homes that were bringing, some people in, and I think there was some, I can't remember how that all went, but I just want to know how that all works.
So a couple of different things. Number one, there were a handful of people, it wasn't busloads, that were brought in.
Yeah.
And they were all voting under their own ability. None of them had assistance that was doing, just to clarify that again. Number 2, election judges who do healthcare voting outreach have to have an additional hour of training specifically around how to conduct healthcare facility voting. One of the things that they do, because they do have to do it in teams of 2, one election judge of one party, one of another one of the things that they are taught is you have to make sure that you are not influencing the voter in any way that you do that. You don't say, do you want to vote for Trump or do you want to vote for Biden? You say, here are the office, U.S. President, here's the list of candidates. Trump, Biden, so-and-so, so-and-so. Which candidate would you like to vote for? The voter has to be able to tell them who they want to vote for. They can't say, do you want to vote for the Republican or the Democrat? They can't say, do you want to vote for the man or the woman? They can't say, you usually vote Republican. Do you want to just vote Republican on all of these? These are legit training exercises that we put them through to go through that process of how to conduct that. But Tim, as that person who's laying there in that bed, unless there is a court order that has said he is under guardianship of the person and he has lost his right to vote, he is the only person that gets to determine whether he should vote or not.
But if that person, if those 2 are trying to get Tim to vote and you can just tell that things aren't clicking, then do they just say?
They will put a note. So in that particular case, and there have been circumstances where voter wasn't able to respond, voter did not indicate how they wanted to respond, voter was asleep and we couldn't wake him up, voter did not vote while we were here. They have what's called an incident log, just like you would in a polling place. They mark down whatever the circumstance was around that situation, and it's just possible Tim's not going to get to vote that day when they are there.
And I want to make sure that people know that I'm not making light of this. I'm bringing this up.
These are good points.
Because I don't want somebody to say, you're doing this. No, we've got checks and balances of how we're doing the process.
Yep.
And like I've said in the past, I'm confident. I can't speak for Hennepin County, I can't speak for Mississippi or Louisiana, but I can speak for Crow Wing County that I'm confident that, and if you remember when I first ran for the Senate, there was a recount. you know, and every single ballot was hand counted, and there was a 3-vote difference
Yep.
out of about 35,000 ballots, so.
Yeah.
Darn close.
I'm just gonna throw this one out there because I'd like to ask the question. If somebody is in the jail, they haven't been prosecuted yet, they aren't a felon, they haven't been prosecuted as a felon yet, they are still eligible to vote.
That is correct.
Do they have the ability to vote when they're in jail?
They do, if they are pre-sentenced and they have not been convicted.
Right,
Convicted is the
convicted,
key
yep.
word. If they have not been convicted of a felony and they meet all the other criteria, they could apply for an absentee ballot even when they're sitting at the jail.
Okay,
As long as they're pre-sentenced and it's not a felony situation.
okay.
Yep. One thing to point out on the healthcare piece, this used to apply to 4 facilities in Crow Wing County. Cuyuna Medical Center, Bethany, Woodland Acres, and Brainerd Manor. Those were the nursing homes that qualified under the previous statute with what had to have healthcare outreach. And it only applied to those 2 municipalities of Brainerd and Crosby to have to coordinate the judges and go to those locations. With the change to include assisted living facilities, the new list has up to 20 establishments in Baxter, Brainerd, Crosby, Cross Lake, Nisswa, and Pequot Lakes that this could have impact on. So while it's not necessarily the county that is going out and doing that outreach, the cities are coordinating those election judges for that purpose. There will be expanded costs because we're now processing and getting ready and coordinating for up to 20 establishments instead of 4. And there will be additional costs because there will be more election judge time associated with going out to serve those communities. And I say up to because the assisted living piece is optional. That's at a mutual agreement between the facility and the municipality. So they don't have to go to all of those. We still have to go to those 4 that are required under the nursing home piece, but the others are optional.
Well, one more question on that. Okay, so when you leave here, when the judges leave here, do they know exactly how many ballots do they need, or do
Yes.
they do?
So a couple of ways that they know. We coordinate with the facilities ahead of time to say anybody who wants to vote, have them fill out an application so that we can go through that process, make sure they're registered as a registered voter, that we have all that information. And we have a packet pre-made for everybody who has registered and applied ahead of time. So they can say, we're gonna go to Cuyuna and there are 32 people that are gonna vote that day. We're gonna have 32 packets all put together for them. We will have some extra materials, a few extra ballots, a few extra envelopes and extra applications, because it never fails that once in a while there are either new residents from the time that we have set there, or that someone who didn't fill out the application ahead of time now has decided that they do want to vote. The other key thing I need to point out around healthcare piece, the nursing homes and these new facilities is only if that is your permanent legal residence. So the nursing home facilities, it's only for those who are there full-time, not a rehab situation. They cannot vote through this process if they're just there temporarily. Election judges come here, they sign a chain of custody form that says we're giving you 32 packets plus 10 additional ballots and materials to go to Cuyuna. They must travel by law in the same vehicle. They have to travel, those 2 judges of different political parties have to ride together from when they pick the ballots up here, and they go to Crosby, they vote everybody, they bring everything back, they have to ride in the same car back here.
I didn't think they could do that anymore.
Yeah, we're gonna review that chain of custody list, and we're gonna say, you brought us back 32 ballot packets plus 10 extra
Who's
ballots.
gonna account for those?
We account for what goes out and what comes in.
Grab a stack and say,
I'll be back.
No.
I'll be back.
No. We do not do that. Okay, let's talk a little bit around some of the administration stuff that's going to be not as impactful, but still have some impact on us. Preliminary and public accuracy testing. If you recall, this is that process we invited everybody to come to and got 3 people to show up to in the last election. So now we're going to push it out a little bit further. Because we now have early voting, absentee voting, direct balloting starting 18 days before Election Day, we have to push back our preliminary and public accuracy testing. This now has to be accomplished within 3 days prior to when that voting begins, or basically 21 days before Election Day. This is going to possibly require some additional man-hour resources for us. Proofing ballots, pre-testing equipment before we get to the public testing process can take about 3 weeks of time. We now are going to have a much tighter window to get this done. We used to have to do public accuracy testing 7 to 14 days before the election. So this has now pushed us back significantly for us, and we'll probably have some extra overtime that's going to be needed to absorb that cost. This is a win for the voters. The sample ballot publication, if you recall, we used to have about 6 pages in the paper where it was every office from president down to hospital board and everything in between, and it was just in a list of everything. It was city council and it had all of them listed together. This is super confusing to the voters because we got a lot of people who would come in and say, Representative so-and-so wasn't on my ballot, but I saw it in the paper, it was in the paper. Well, you don't live in Representative so-and-so's district, so yes, even though it was on the sample ballot in the paper, it's not going to be on the ballot in your precinct. Now, instead of publishing that super confusing publication ballot, we have to publish a notice to voters, which includes a statement to the voters about how they can get a copy of their precinct-specific sample ballot. There is a tool on the Secretary of State's website that's basically you put in your address and it gives you your own sample ballot. So we'll be providing information to direct them to a tool to do that, to be able to see their own sample ballot. We have to post every sample ballot for every precinct on our website. We also will have to put into this notice to voters a contact information for the county where someone can call us and say, I don't have access to the internet, can you send me a copy of my sample ballot? And it has to be 1 full page of print. This was the work of many years of work between MACo and the Minnesota Newspapers Association. The M&A provision was that it still had to be 1 full page. So there might be a lot of white space, looking over at the newspaper ladies here, there might be a lot of white space on that page, but we can also put on there polling locations, polling hours, some of the same notices that we've been providing to voters in the past. This should reduce cost, significant cost. It costs us about $4,000 a year, an election, to publish the sample ballot. This should bring our costs down quite a bit and be better clarity to the voters and more useful tool.
So Deb, just another question. So when candidates come in and they sign up for office, you know, they might have a nickname or something. Can't put that in like Paul Costcutter Coring?
Right, you can't be Paul Costcutter Coring on the ballot.
Can't put that in there?
Right.
Okay.
That is correct.
Darn it.
Even if you are commonly known, you have to use the word that you are commonly known by in the community, or you can use a name you are commonly known by in the community. However, it cannot provide you any advantage over another candidate. So you can't be Dr. Hool. If you're running for coroner, you can't put yourself down as Dr. Hool. And even though somebody might say, hey, you are a good cost cutter, how's it going there? That would be giving you an advantage over another candidate.
All right.
But that's a great segue into our next piece about campaigning. So there has been, if you recall, there's always been the prohibition where basically you can't wear political attire in a polling place, is what we've always said. Well, back in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court said that Minnesota's prohibition on anything political in nature was too broad and infringed on free speech. So that in 2018, we then changed to say you couldn't wear the name of a political party or a candidate in the polling place if that candidate or party was on the ballot in that polling place in that election. This year, the state legislature has kind of codified that into law, and in addition has also included that you cannot have likenesses, slogans, or logos of candidates. Slogo, we could come up with a new word.
Logo, I like, new word.
Logos and slogans of a candidate on the ballot or a political party. So this kind of just defines a little bit more as far as what is or is not allowed in a polling place. Also includes polling places that serve as absentee voting. So you recall, we always send that message out in this location. You can't be parked in our parking lot or in the building with that on during that absentee voting period. It does only apply to the hours of voting. So if someone was here for a meeting, like a planning and zoning meeting at 6 o'clock at night and voting ended at 5 o'clock, they are free to wear whatever they want to wear at that point in time. So when a candidate filing, there were a couple of changes that I just wanted you all to be aware about around candidate filing. It is now a requirement that a candidate has to provide an email address on their affidavit of candidacy, and it has to be a non-governmental email address. So you cannot use your crowing.us email address when you file for candidacy. Or if you don't have an email address, you have to fill out an attestation that says you do not have an email address. You also can request, candidates can request to have their data, their residential data, basically be considered private data if they have a reasonable fear for safety regarding their safety of them or their family. In the past, this only applied if an order of protection or a police report had already been filed, that you could check that little box that says, I don't want anybody to know my information. Now, if you just have a reasonable fear, you can check the box and say, I don't want my contact information to be made public. A couple of things around election day provisions, if you will, in the polling place. They have now said that election judge misconduct is grounds for any municipal clerk or auditor to remove an election judge at any time for malfeasance, neglect, or misconduct, regardless if they are considered on the party list or whether they were just signed up through community venture, whatever it might be. Challengers have to submit their challenge in writing to the election judge, and the election judge has to be the one to administer the challenge. The challenger cannot converse with the voter, which is basically how we have been administering this process. It just now puts it into law what that practice had been. There are a few...
Clarify for me, what is
A
challenge?
challenger. So a challenge situation, a candidate or a political party can appoint a polling place challenger. Minnesota does not have poll watchers or poll observers like some places do, but what we have are challengers. And a challenger can be in a polling place to challenge a voter's eligibility to vote there based on their own personal knowledge of that voter's eligibility in that polling place. I'll be blunt. Challenges very, very infrequently happen because most of the time the appointed challengers aren't even from that polling place precinct and have no idea whether these people are eligible to vote there or not. Now, election judges who are serving in a polling place can also challenge a voter's eligibility if they have personal knowledge of the fact that that voter is not eligible. So in Commissioner Coring's example before about living in Morrison County with my mail ballot, and when you come in to vote and your election judge in Long Lake Township says, but Paul, you live down in Morrison County, why would you be voting here even though you have this address here? You don't live here, because I live next door and there's never any lights on and you haven't been in the driveway at all.
Damn.
That
Gotcha. They got you, Paul. They finally got you.
Missed it by that much.
That election judge can fill out a challenger form. There is a process in statute, and there are questions that the election judge would ask the voter under oath to certify some of these different things as part of that challenger process.
Okay.
Yeah. So election day registration. There are a couple of changes around criteria for election day registration. Student housing lists usually applied just to those universities that provided dormitory, student housing, apartments on campus, that kind of thing. Now the law has changed to say that every post-secondary institution that accepts state financial aid has to prepare a list of students enrolled at the campus and residing in campus housing, or if they have an address where they are living in the city where the campus is located. So I'm going to give you the example of Central Lakes Housing, or Central Lakes College. Central Lakes College is going to have to provide for us a list of all the students who are enrolled at CLC who either live on campus housing or who live in the city limits of Brainerd, because that is where the campus is located. We then have to provide that list to the election judges. Those students can utilize their student ID along with their name on that housing list as their proof of residence to register on election day. It's been in law, it's a little different, it's gonna have broader expanse. We really haven't had a student housing list situation here in Crow Wing County. This will be the first one where that is the case. Electronic voting systems. We have had a lot of folks in the past who have been saying, we want you to go back to hand count. We don't trust the machines. We want to count the ballots by hand. The law has now been changed to say that once a precinct adopts and by adopts basically means uses, an electronic voting system, it cannot change back to hand counting. So all of our precincts have used electronic voting systems, and as such, under this current law now, cannot revert back to a hand count system. It does not apply to March Township elections, even though some of our townships who are greater than 500 residents have to have the ICE tabulator there for the assisted voting piece of it, because they're required to have assisted voting equipment at their polling place. They are using those OpScan ballots, they're counting those by hand. They can still continue to do that for their March Township election. Couple of things around Canvas Board. You as the Canvas Board would now have the ability to direct the auditor to appeal to district court if there is an obvious error present. So on the Canvas report, if a number was transposed to say 32 instead of 23, or if there's an obvious error of some kind that is listed on the Canvas report, that can now direct the county auditor to appeal to district court. Previously, the candidate had to appeal to district court, and usually the auditor had to notify the candidate, who then had to appeal to district court. In a primary and general situation, ballot preparation is really, really timely, needing to be done quickly. This just eliminates the middleman, basically, and allows those obvious errors to be appealed.
Deb, why don't you name off who would be on the canvassing board?
Canvas Board includes 2 county commissioners at the county level, which is what this law applies to. The Canvas Board includes 2 county commissioners who are not on the ballot, the auditor of the county, the mayor of the largest municipality of the county, and the district court clerk. And that is set by statute.
Statute.
Yes.
If after redistricting, all 5 members of the board are up for election, you still will select 2.
Correct. A commissioner can also appoint a registered voter in their district to take their place on the Canvas Board in that particular case as well. Cast vote record. We had a lot of conversation around cast vote records, if you recall, in the last couple of years. And what this law now has done is saying that clarifying ballot image data is non-public data, which has been opinions from the County Attorneys Association, as well as a court determination that ballot images are simply basically the same thing as the ballots themselves, and therefore are non-public data. Around the cast vote record itself, the law says you do not have to produce a cast vote record, but if one is produced, it is public data, except for the date, time, order in, that says white, in which is what it's supposed to be. My spell check didn't pick that up. In which a voter cast a record, cast a ballot, the method of the ballot cast, meaning was it in person, absentee, early voting, whatever it might be for how they cast it. The data on how the ballot order was generated, which is that algorithm piece we were talking about, the randomization of how that report is generated. Data files that don't include all ballots in a precinct. So as I said, you're going to have a set for polling place and a set for absentee. You can't provide just one or the other. And data from precincts with fewer than 10 votes cast. So if you recall in the primary election last year, we had a voter in one precinct who only one voter had cast an absentee ballot in that precinct. Because this law wasn't in play yet, if we would have provided that data information, someone would have been able to tell how that voter had voted, and that secrecy would have been eliminated. Now, we're going to be required to redact all of that information so that no voter's ballot can be tied back to them. It says we're not required to produce a cast vote record. What I will say is the ICE equipment that we currently are using, the tabulation equipment that we use, automatically produces a cast vote record. So it does automatically produce one. If we do get a request for a cast vote record, we will have to provide it. We will have to redact all of that information off of it, which is basically what we did in 2022. We got one request for a cast vote record report. We redacted pretty much all of this information first.
Deb, is it against the law to, say, I got my ballot and I'm in the voting booth and I've filled out the page, the front page, not the judges on the back, and I take my smartphone and I take a picture of the ballot. Is it, I always was under the impression that it was against the law to do that.
So it is not technically against the law. It is technically against the law to show a voted ballot to another person if you're trying to influence how they vote or to prove a point of how you voted or to show them, because it takes away the secrecy of the ballot, essentially is what it's involved. If you take a picture of your own ballot in the voting booth, nobody's going to know that. We have no way of enforcing that.
Right.
We do not allow photography in the polling place from the standpoint that, as we said earlier, whether or not Rosemary goes to vote is her private information also. So if you're taking a picture in the polling place and have her in the background, you've now violated her privacy as well.
I understand. Okay, it's good to know.
Okay, my question is, this person, Paul goes in and he takes a picture of his ballot and then he puts it on Facebook. Is that legal?
That's not legal either. That, you shouldn't post a picture of your ballot on Facebook. We've had to tell folks that in the past, that you don't want to inadvertently put yourself in a position where that's not going to be the right thing to do.
You would create legal jeopardy for yourself. I don't know if anyone's ever been prosecuted for photographing their own ballot.
Right.
If you were posting a photograph of someone else's ballot, you should expect criminal prosecution.
Yep. You shouldn't be taking a picture of someone else's ballot to
I don't know
start
how you
with.
would get it.
I don't know how you would be getting to that point, but it's just always, well, I should say I don't know how you get to that point, but anecdotally, we did have a voter at one point who looked over the top of the voting booth at how his wife was marking her ballot and said, "Why are you marking it like that?" We did have to ask them to refrain from conversation and to stay in his own voting booth while he was in
Oh,
the
sure, I
polling
bet the
place.
car ride went
Yeah,
well.
car ride.
Ride
they-
together back home, yes.
They can talk
Sure,
about it
that was good.
however they want, but
Add you there and say, stay in your own lane.
stay in your own lane.
So if they did that, I mean, let's say Paul took a picture of it because he wanted to prove a point, and he sent it to me. Now, I took that Paul's picture and I sent it on. I'm the guilty party.
You are. Yep.
I doubt anybody.
Don't
gets
send it to me, Paul. I don't want to,
Here,
I just don't want to
I
know.
voted for you.
I don't want to know. You voted for me up in my district, I know that, yeah, thanks.
It was a write-in.
It was a write-in.
That's a write-in.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Deb.
No, that was good. We're going to actually talk about write-ins in a little bit too, and that's a great example. A little bit around mail balloting, a couple of changes. There were some streamlining of processes for Election Day for mail ballot voters who want to come and vote in person and place their ballot directly in the tabulator. While mail ballot jurisdictions, while jurisdictions have the ability to determine whether or not they want to do mail balloting, not every voter in those precincts are happy about that fact.
Yep.
The county courthouse serves as their polling place on Election Day. They can come into the courthouse on Election Day and place their ballot directly into the tabulator, and we've streamlined that process a little bit with some law change.
I had somebody mention that to me the other day, and they said, yeah, but when I brought it down there, it shows it as an absentee ballot.
Correct.
And I said, well, because you weren't in your polling place
Correct.
that you normally would ballot. Well, it was all mail ballot anyway.
Yep. Yep.
So,
mail ballot precinct history does show as absentee voting.
Right.
And when they were, and that was part of when they would come in to vote on Election Day. We had to convert their record basically to an absentee polling place because they did not vote by mail. They voted in person via that process. We've now streamlined that. It should now show as a mail ballot. It's still going to show as mail ballot or absentee from that perspective.
But Deb, Fort Ripley, which votes by mail, they don't have to wait till Election Day.
No, absolutely not.
They can come in
Yes.
anytime that early voting starts.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
With their
Those
ballot,
mail-
rather than mailing it in.
Correct. Those mail ballot voters have that same window of direct ballot access or early voting access as others. Yep.
If they do the early voting, will they be able to put it into the tabulator, or is that only on Election Day?
If they do the early voting, they'll be able to put it into the tabulator as well. Yes. A couple other things around mail balloting. Those now can also be processed beginning 18 days before Election Day. And the municipality location restrictions were removed. The law says that any township of any size or any city of less than 400 voters can adopt mail balloting provisions. Up until this year, it did not allow metro counties to take advantage of that. There were a couple of small jurisdictions in Dakota County, that's where this provision came from, less than 100 voters who wanted to take advantage of mail balloting, and they were not allowed to do so because there was a restriction on metro counties to be able to do that. So now any location throughout the state, any township of any size, or city under 400.
Right now, we have what, 18
We have 18 precincts that vote exclusively by mail in Crow Wing
out of the
County.
45 that we
Yes.
have available?
Correct.
How many more could if they wanted to?
Other than all of our townships could, so I think there's 38 townships if I remember right. All of the townships could go to mail balloting, and cities under 400, there's probably about two, maybe three cities that would still qualify.
And that would, on those, I know when I was the mayor of Jenkins, we switched over to that. And at first, I didn't like the idea, but then when we look at the cost of a primary with 5 election judges and all the process, for the number of votes, it seemed to be they still got their vote in, it was still done correctly and
Right.
legally, and everything's right.
Yep.
But we were able to save some money.
We've actually done some estimates, and I need to redo these again now with postage rates the way they are. But the 400 threshold of a city of less than 400, about 400 voters is where that tipping point is. If you don't get at least 400 voters who show up to vote on election day, it costs way more for a municipality to house it, to have election judges, all of those things on election day. There were a couple of things that were put in, a couple of things put into play around election interference. If you recall, in 2022 particularly, there was a lot of concern about the election equipment and folks wanting to try to see what they could do to tamper with or to disrupt. Not here, but in the media. There are now civil and criminal penalties that are associated with interference in elections. It prohibits activities around the intimidation of election officials or interference in the elections process, including access, tampering with voting equipment, ballot boxes, rosters, or voter registration systems. And this applies to election officials, election judges, and the general public, and to citizens and voters in the polling place on election day. So it prevents me and my team from doing anything nefarious. It prevents election judges from doing anything nefarious, and it prevents the general population from doing anything nefarious. Also, it also prohibits electronic imaging of any hard drive or components of the election equipment system. So we had folks in the last election who were trying to take pictures of the vote tabulator and how it was hooked up, and still trying to prove that it was connected to the internet, even though it's not connected to the internet. That is now against the law to do so.
Is that new, Debbie?
That is new.
Really?
That is new this year. Just for your FYI, a couple of things don't really have any impact on the county, but it's things that were changed and has some noteworthiness. Beginning with 2024, in order for a political party to retain major party status or even attain major party status, they must receive 8% on a statewide race to retain party status, and they must hold conventions in every congressional district or at least 45 counties or legislative districts, and have executive committees as well. Previously, the threshold to attain major party status was you had to get 5% on a statewide office. 5%. Now you have to get 8% and have nominating conventions. Right now, we have the Republican, the DFL, and the Legal Marijuana Now parties still having major party status. Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party was previously a major party. They dropped off after 22. They did not attain that 5% threshold. I'm not sure what the Legal Marijuana Now party's platform will be now that marijuana is legal now. So I don't know that they will be able to maintain that status, and as well as the convention piece. They did not hold conventions in every congressional district in the last election cycle either. So also, with regard to the presidential nomination primary, if you recall, that election, when you went into the polling place, you had to tell the election judges which party's ballot you wanted to receive. Did you want a Republican ballot or a DFL ballot? And that choice was recorded in your voter history record, and that choice was provided to all of the major parties' to know how you chose. Now the law has been changed to say your choice will be provided to the major party of your choice, not to everyone. So it narrowed down who's going to get access to that data. Minnesotans are not super excited about sharing their political party information, that it gets recorded in many cases. We did hear that from a lot of the election judges, that there was a lot of angst around having to declare which party's ballot they wanted. And this, again, I liken the presidential nomination primary to a little bit of a party building exercise, similar to how the caucuses operate. This was their list building thing. They're only going to get to build their list based on the people now who select their party.
So still, Deb, when somebody goes to the polling place, they're still going to have to ask them.
They still are going to have to declare which party they want.
Which ballot you want.
Correct.
Okay.
But instead of your name being provided to 3 parties, it's only going to be provided to 1.
Okay.
Okay?
So if you're not on the list, you're not part of that party.
Which you do not have to be registered with a political party or a member of that party in order to vote in Minnesota, just as a reminder for folks. But in the presidential nominating primary, you have to declare a party preference to get a ballot.
And remember earlier when I was saying that the presidential primary is a partisan exercise? It's not a democracy exercise. That's what this is about. The political parties, you're going to the primary, you're selecting candidates for the parties. You're not electing someone. You're selecting candidates for the parties to put on the ballot. That's the election. The general election is the election. And so, going from 5% to 8%, I would imagine, will discourage the formation of third parties.
Yep.
I wonder who that benefits.
I wonder.
Yep. Just a couple of other things around polling places. This is an administrative win as far as we're concerned for our cities and townships. It was previously in the law that they had to file a resolution every year by December 31st that said what their polling place was going to be for the next year, even if no changes had happened. Now they only have to pass that resolution if there is a change. We had a lot of them that would forget to pass that resolution because nothing was changing. Now they only have to file that resolution if there is going to be a change. You will see one of these resolutions coming to you in the next couple of months. We have found a second location for a polling place in the 1st Assessment District. If you recall, we combined precincts 1 and 2 into the Turn-In-Poachers building, which was okay in the primary election, was crowded in November, and will not work for a state presidential election. So we are touring another facility on Thursday. We think we found an alternative location that will be able to split those 2 locations up. So precinct 2 will have a resolution coming before you. School districts will still need to provide an annual resolution. If they are going to have a standalone school district election in an off year, they have to have what their special election combined polling locations will be. That is an annual resolution that they will still have to do every year. This is not one that applies to Crow Wing County so much right now under our current demographic makeup, but could have implications in the future and also applies to several of our neighboring counties as well. Basically, voting instructions and example ballots, the Secretary of State's office has to provide those in the 3 most commonly spoken languages. The Secretary of State's office, by choice over the last probably decade or so, has been providing voting instructions in multiple languages to counties to use in their communities as they need it. Now it's a requirement that they will have to provide them in the 3 most commonly spoken languages, including example ballots and the voting instructions. The one that could have more local impact is the population determination piece of it. The Secretary of State or the auditor has to determine the number of voting age residents by census tract who are members of a language minority and who lack sufficient skills in English to vote without assistance. This is basically looking at census tract data to determine pockets where English is spoken with less than proficiency that would allow those voters to vote independently without assistance. If that number is 3% or more in a given census tract, not a county level, but at a census tract level, the county must provide instructions and sample ballots in those languages at the polling place. And if it's more than 20% and at least 10 voters in that precinct request it, the auditor must provide at least one interpreter in that polling place. They have to appoint at least one interpreter in that polling place if it is requested to have them do so.
What are the three languages? Do you know?
I believe, I do not remember off the top of my head. I heard it during the conference or during the committee presentation on this piece. I do not remember. I believe there is a Hmong dialect one, a Somali, and Spanish, I believe, are the three that are the top three.
I always thought English was the official language of the United States, but I guess not anymore.
Official ballots, just to clarify, official ballots are still English only. This is just example ballots and instructions that are going to be required to be posted in different languages.
Oh,
But the
okay.
ballots themselves are in English only.
I see.
They can read those, why can't they read the sample?
Like I said, with our current demographics and our current census tract delineations of such, this is not going to apply in Crow Wing County right now. It is something we should be aware of in the future. Here's another kind of a win, if you will, for local municipalities where it comes around with write-ins. If you recall, for federal, state, and county offices, if a candidate wants to have their write-ins counted individually, they had to file a written request to have that be done 7 days before the election. But for city, township, school district, hospital board, park board, all of those other type of races, the election judges had to count everything that was written in, whether it was Mickey Mouse, whether it was Santa Claus, whether it was anybody but that guy, which Mr. Ryan has received that vote for a few times in the county attorney's race. We've seen that one as a write-in several times. But any of those types of things had to be looked at, tallied, counted. This adds hours of processing time to the election judges at the end of a day when they've already been there for hours upon hours. And this is a very time-consuming process. I will never forget the year that Jesse Ventura was elected governor of Minnesota. Think about the judicial side of your ballot. How many of those offices have opposition? Well, I can tell you of the 32 judicial races we had in 2022, 0 had any opposition. None of the judges had any filed candidates with them other than one person in each office. And in the year when Governor Ventura was elected, those judicial races had every wrestler you could possibly imagine getting written in for judge write-ins. And we were sitting in the elections office until about 9 o'clock the next morning tallying write-in votes. Therese can probably attest to that as well, tallying the write-in votes that came through from that process. This will help to cure that. Cities can now adopt a resolution requiring one of two things. They can adopt a resolution to have candidates have to file a written request to have their write-ins counted, just like they do for federal, state, or county offices. Or cities can also adopt a resolution that would say that the write-ins are only going to be tallied individually if the total number of write-in votes is greater than or equal to the fewest number of votes of a filed candidate. So basically they're saying if Doug is on the ballot and he gets 10 votes, unless there are at least 11 write-ins on that tape, we're not going to look at the write-in candidates at all. They're not going to be tallied individually. This is the same action that a township or a school district can take. There are two caveats to this. Number one, if there's nobody that has filed for an office, which sometimes does occur, the election judges are still instructed that they have to look at every ballot for that office to figure out what that write-in is going to be. If a city or township does not adopt either of these resolutions, they're still going to have to look at every ballot, the write-ins for the write-ins at the polling place on election day. And additionally, the write-in target now has to be filled in and completed in order for a write-in to be tabulated by an optical scan machine. This will still allow for voter intent to be determined if there's a recount situation by looking at that. But our election judges are so good at giving instructions, and our voters are so good at listening to instructions most of the time, that they're filling in those target areas anyway. This will have good benefits to our cities and townships for those election judges on election night.
Will you be taking steps to notify them of the change to encourage them to pass these resolutions?
Absolutely. As soon as I had finished this presentation, I'm working on one that's specific to cities and townships, and we'll be giving them a lot of communication around that as well. And then finally, just a couple of last things. There were a lot of changes in legislation that changed updates of resides to maintains residence. I don't know what the difference is between the two, but apparently some lawyer-type folks felt that that was more appropriate. And then also updated under the absentee status to change return envelope to signature envelope, which is funny because about up until 6-8 years ago, the statute said signature envelope, and then they changed it to return envelope. So impact of this, we have to have all new voter registration applications, absentee ballot applications, we have to have all new forms of materials that need to get applied as well. This does not mean we have to get rid of everything we have. We can use some existing stock, particularly around our absentee instructions and envelopes, but we will have to have new redesigned forms and applications as well. And finally, I just wanted to touch really briefly on ranked choice voting, because I know that there was a lot of conversation in the legislature this year around ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is currently allowed in Minnesota for any charter city who wants to hold ranked choice voting as long as their election is held not in conjunction with any other election. So the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Brooklyn Park, I believe, and I think there's one other, currently have their municipal elections in the odd year and use ranked choice voting for their municipal elections. MACO, which is the Minnesota Association of County Officers, or the statewide group of my peers, we have for years said if any municipality wants to use ranked choice voting in a standalone election, we are more than happy to support their choice to be able to do so. What we do oppose is having ranked choice voting and non-ranked choice voting on the same ballot at the same election. You want to talk about voter confusion? That's the surest way to make that happen. If you're not familiar with ranked choice voting, your list of candidates, instead of fill in the oval, it's rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in order of your preference. You have to get at least 51 and 52%, whatever it is, of the vote to be able to go on to the next round. If one candidate does not receive that number of votes, then you take everybody's who didn't have first choice of that candidate and you move to their second choice and you allocate out those votes. This is a very complex process. It's very time consuming. It's quite confusing to many voters. And there is a group of lobbyists at the state who have been pushing for ranked choice voting changes that got very close this year. The outcome of this is now basically a voting issue study has to be conducted by the Secretary of State's office with issues related to voter engagement and improvements to the election system. It has to include ranked choice voting, but not necessarily be limited to ranked choice voting. They have to include members of community organizations and election administrators from counties, cities, and townships. And they have to have a report back to the legislature by February 1st of 2025.
So Deb, so does that mean that, so like, let's say somebody adopts ranked choice voting, they don't have a primary? If there's like 5 people running for one office, you go, I like, this is my first choice, and blah, blah, blah.
That is correct.
But
In some extent. In nonpartisan offices, yes, there would not be a primary. It would just roll it down. So like for county commissioner,
Right.
there would not be a primary. They would just list the 7 people who filed for county commissioner, and you would rank your choices, and then we would filter all that out to figure out who is the winner of that race. In a partisan office, there still has to be a primary, because for the general election, there can only be one candidate from each political party.
I see.
So there could be a primary of ranked choice, and then a general of ranked choice as well.
But if there's 7 people running for one office, somebody could possibly win with 30% of the vote.
And that's where ranked choice comes into play. You have to get 51% of the vote.
And then if, let's say, well, okay, so what if somebody doesn't get 51%, then what happens?
Okay, so if after everybody's first choice allocations are put out and the top candidate has 38%, you take everybody who did not have that top candidate as their number one choice and you allocate out, you drop off all those other candidates and you allocate those votes based on their number 2 choice. Who did the rest of those ballots go for number 2? Now, you went from 38% to 44%, but you still don't have 51% of the vote.
Okay.
So now we're going to take everybody who didn't have you as your number 2 candidate, we're going to take all of those ballots, drop them off, and ration out their number 3 choice. Now you have 50%, but you need to have 51%. So now we're going to drop those off and go to the number 4 choice and allocate them out that way.
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. I don't know.
So the advantage of ranked choice voted, according to proponents of ranked choice, is that it is supposed to provide a more civil dialogue that allows for more third-party and fringe candidates versus main party A or B. The thought is it will require candidates to play more to the middle of the pack and be more moderate and encourage civil discourse instead of just being out on the fringes. Because if you do have 7 candidates and you only need to get 22% of the vote to be able to win, you only need to get 22% of the people to approve.
It helps people get their first choice, so they can vent their spleen. And oftentimes that will be a fringe candidate or somebody that they feel really, really passionately about. And then they're going to vote for their second choice will be probably a more mainstream candidate.
Right.
And you're going to end up, because of how that works, you're going to end up with more of those second choices counted and more of those third choices counted. What it drives is, it drives you more towards the middle at the expense of our political parties.
Yeah.
And that is
So-
the main advantage, I think.
And this is why there are good things about ranked choice voting. There are good things that are there, and that's why we support those charters or those cities, municipalities. It doesn't have to be a charter city. We should give any city or township, any county, the ability to do it on their own. Not when you have mixed.
You can't mix them. It's got to be either, it's all the one way in an election, or it's all the other way. And to go back and forth between, like, a primary is one way, and that is a recipe for disaster.
Yes.
So I think Alaska.
Alaska and Maine both do their legislative races.
Because I think the Sarah Palin
Yes.
thing was kind of a mess.
Yes.
They didn't know who won for a while.
Because they had to finish the runoff. Because she didn't have, I don't remember who was the successful candidate, I can't remember her name.
Lisa Murkowski.
Murkowski, thank you.
Does not win if you don't have ranked choice voting. Lisa Murkowski probably loses.
And because Murkowski did not have 51% at the end of the election night, when the counting was done, they had to go and allocate out all those. And it does take longer to do that process.
So if it was a regular primary where Lisa Murkowski, the Republicans were very, very upset with her, if there was another Republican running, it would be,
Sarah Palin was.
yeah, well, I don't know if she was running against Murkowski, was she?
I think she was.
Okay, yeah.
But that's it. That is the
The
circumstance.
rank, okay, all right.
So you hear a lot of folks say that I don't want to vote for a third-party candidate because I'm just throwing away my vote. This is their opportunity to feel like they're not throwing away their vote. They can vote for their candidate of choice. As Tim said, they can vote for where their passions lie, and then still have the ability to weigh in on what's maybe going to be more of that choice A or B.
So Republicans in Alaska probably voted Sarah Palin number 1, Lisa Murkowski number 2. But non-Republicans probably voted Lisa Murkowski and Sarah Palin. And ranked
Well, I
choice
think-
voting allowed for the second choices to be counted.
Well, I think that the whole endorsement process, and I know that from experience is a bunch of baloney, and you can quote me on that. Because you've got, when I was running for senator, and well, I really don't care. So when I had 90,000 people voting for me, I had about 100 people deciding whether or not I was the candidate or not, which doesn't even make sense, you know? Anyway.
I think
so.
the question is, are our political parties today representative of the general population?
No, they're not.
I agree.
But they'll work hard to make sure nobody else can come in the middle.
Oh, definitely.
And that's why there are conversations about ranked choice voting.
Correct.
Very frankly, it's because of the demise of our political parties that people are looking for alternative ways to have folks talk to each other a little more than they currently are.
To get the best
Well,
candidate.
Yeah. That's why I just support the primary method rather than the endorsement method, where everybody can go and decide who's going to go on to the general election. That's all I'm saying. When you have a handful of, they always used to say the smoke-filled room of people deciding, I don't know that you get the quality candidates the people's choice.
The people's
So,
choice.
anyway, I'm just.
Yeah, it's a people's choice then.
I digress.
This is a really active football that I think Deb's talking about here, and the discussions at the legislature, and they're probably a reflection of larger issues. But I think this was a decent outcome at least. Okay, go look at the pros, go look at the cons, inform the legislature of what the pros and the cons are, and then they'll make a decision.
And part of the thing with ranked choice voting is the processes of the how need to be considered upfront as well. If we're going to look at, I had a conversation with one of the proponents, and I said, how do we take a legislative race that crosses Itasca, Cass, Crow Wing, Morrison, and Aiken counties? How are we going to allocate out those second, third, fourth choices? In all seriousness, she said, well, there are tools to do that. There are online tools that you can use for that purpose. I'm like, well, that's an additional expense that we have to be concerned about. Oh, but it's free. And I'm like, I'm not going to suggest we use a free online tool to determine the outcome of an election after the last few years. We're not going to go there. But there are things that have to be looked at because we are a decentralized system. Why this works in Maine and Alaska is they are state-run elections, not county-run elections. They are single jurisdictions or smaller jurisdictions. They don't have as many legislative districts and cross boundaries as what we do. Where we have multiple jurisdictions that are represented by different equipment, different services, different things. We have to look at all of those things as we start looking at some of these things for ranked choice.
Compared, and I don't know this, but you probably do, as far as state of Minnesota versus other states, do we have a pretty complicated election system versus other, or are we right in the middle of the pack?
I don't know if complicated is the right way to describe it. We have a state-run database that is maintained at the county level with elections run at the county level and supported by the local municipalities. Whether that's complicated or not, the decentralization of that is actually a safeguard. It provides for local choice. There's less areas of where you can have major impact for things to go wrong in that type of regard. If you have a completely state-run system where they dictate the equipment, all the management of the voter registration system and everything else, you have one attack of some kind that happens there, that takes out your full system.
Okay.
So from the conversations I have with my colleagues at a national level, it's always at a differing, we sit around the table at breakout sessions and say, so is your state run or local run? Well, then you get somewhere it's down to the cities and the townships are doing all of the things that we're doing at the county level. I always say it could be worse. We could be Wisconsin, where they have multiple layers of all the things of what they do. So every location is unique. I say 87 different counties, 87 different ways of doing it. 50 states, 1,000 million different ways of doing it when you start looking at all of those different things. So that's all I had for you today. I mean, just a short little 2 hours to talk about a lot of stuff that got done this year at the legislative level from the standpoint of election things. There are probably things that, you'll have more questions on, or I will be coming forward with more information as time goes on. And if you have any questions on any of it, you always know you can feel free to reach out. We will be reaching out to our cities and municipalities to let them know the changes, particularly the ones that are going to have some impact on them as well.
I appreciate it. This was very informative, and I hope people that are concerned about this will watch this video today and learn more. I think this was educational.
We talk often about how it's not good when a legislature does nothing. Sometimes it's not good when a legislature does everything all at once. And this is one of those years where we definitely feel that there was a lot of everything all at once. We'll be working through this process as we go. Any other questions for me? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Other than, can we get a copy of this?
Yes, absolutely.
And could you send one to Commissioner Barros?
I will
just to
do
make
so.
sure that he sees it too.
I'll fix my 2 typos and I'll send you a clean copy.
Very good.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I do have one item. Quick one. We had gone up to Emily before to look at Little Emily, the potential Little Emily County Park up there. We went up and listened to people talking about what they would like to see. We are ready with a concept proposal to take back up to the city council. I've reached out to the city of Emily. They meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 6. So they meet on August 8th and September 12th. And I'm thinking that all of us would go back up. We would invite the neighborhood to come back in again. Here's the concept proposal based on what we heard from you. Take feedback on that and continue the process forward.
Question, so then we obviously wouldn't have enough time to gather our information for the August meeting, so then,
We're okay with the August meeting.
huh?
Yeah.
We're ready?
You know, essentially, it's a one-page little.
Okay, okay.
And it's just conceptual at this point. It is because we didn't have a conceptual plan. We were just taking feedback. What should be, what shouldn't be, what are your opinions? So now we took those opinions, we now have a concept plan.
So we
And
go
we could
back,
change that.
so we go back up there and meet at the site again like we did before, and have that
I was
published?
thinking at the city council.
It'd be more formal.
Okay, sounds good.
We've
Yeah,
been
oh,
to the
yeah.
site, so-
Yep, yep.
Are we all riding together?
No, don't say that. Renee's gonna know like
I
that.
watch her like.
August
He's
8th,
gonna slap your hand after this is over with.
would that work for you guys, August 8th? 6 o'clock, Emily City Hall.
What day of the week is that? Tuesday? Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll get it scheduled, and we'll send an appointment request to your calendar, okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, that'd be.
Madam Chair, that's all I have.
All right.
Happy to answer
Anything
any
else?
questions.
Meeting